Danny Dorling. I'm a Professor of Geography at the University of Oxford. The US and the UK are remarkably similar when it comes to poverty and inequality. Amongst rich nations in the world, these are the two largest countries which are the most economically unequal, that have the highest rates of poverty. They're almost like a pair of twins. If you look at the take of the best off 1%, in the United States it's around about 20% of all income, in the UK it kind of hits 15%. Nowhere else of any size in the rich world touches these two countries in terms of how much the very best off take. If you look at the incomes on which the poorest people are living compared to the average, these are the two countries where you're really living a kind of parallel, separate life. If you're in the bottom 20 or 30%, you're not like average people, and average people are not like better off people, and better off people are not like the 1%. The UK has a kind of residual welfare state. It has what is still left from a welfare state which is being dismantled. So it still has a national health service that's worth about £4,000 a year to everybody in the country, but that's being progressively underfunded, privatised and pulled apart. The UK used to have a large social housing sector, but that has largely been sold off to private landlords. The UK has state schools, but so does the United States. In that case, the two are similar. Housing and health are incredibly important. In terms of housing, in the last 10 years in the UK, we've seen a more than doubling of the number of people, and particularly the number of families with children, who have to rent from a private landlord. And the cost of renting from a private landlord is more than twice what it used to cost to rent from the state for exactly the same quality house, actually slightly less quality. Health is crucial. Thankfully, still in the UK, we have a universal health system which insures you, which doesn't cost that if you are seriously hurt, injured or get a disease, you will be treated free of cost. It's often said that the UK and the USA have a special relationship, and in a way, sadly, they do, but it's over a particular set of philosophies which became to the fore under Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, and these were philosophies that the state should be made as small as possible, that people should look after their own money, that we shouldn't do things collectively. There's only you and your family, and there's no such thing as society. And both the US and the UK had movements that propagated these ideas, and that's why they're so very different from almost every other affluent country in the world, where people still believe in the collective good and you do things together, and there's something bigger than just you and your family. It stands on the code of, if you have problems, they are your own fault. If you just worked hard enough, if you tried hard enough, if you studied hard enough at school, you could be really well off. Everybody could be rich if they just worked hard enough. That's the philosophy. And there are many, many problems with it. You can't all be rich, because part of being rich is you can afford to make other people do things like clean your house. Unlike most countries, rich countries in the world, the narrative in the United States and the United Kingdom has been so dominant and so successful because a set of people have really driven it forward here in a way that they haven't in other affluent countries. The US and UK have think tanks funded by extremely rich individuals whose entire purpose is to spread the message that everything is up to you, and if things don't go well, that's your own fault. Other countries don't have the same kind of concentration of money being put into propaganda to tell the population that they should believe this. There's been a lot of studies of what it is that motivates these particular very affluent people who want other people to think like them. When interviewed, they do believe they're special. And it makes sense to them. You know, you have millions and millions of pounds, your business has done very successfully. Why has it done very successful? It must be me. You know, it was me that made it so great. It's a nice, convenient, easy story. You can sleep well at night. There was a feeling when the financial crash hit in 2008 where that was the end of the game. You know, this particular story isn't going to play anymore. The idea that if you just let rich people get richer, everybody will be okay. But what we forget is, if you've invested millions and billions of pounds and dollars in telling a particular story, you don't suddenly decide overnight that you were wrong. What the people with money decided was that, the crash was due to too much government regulation. That was the problem. In fact, it was everything but them. And they carried on paying people to tell the story. Now the narrative did begin to change a bit. In the United States you got Bernie Sanders, in the UK we had 2 leadership elections and a general election, and oh look, we've still got Jeremy Corbyn. So things have altered since 2008, but there hasn't been a kind of road to Damascus moment for the super rich. Way up, everybody up to the people who are in the best off 3% have taken a hit financially. Not as much as a hit as people at the bottom. They've taken the biggest relatively hit, and they're the ones who can't actually get enough food on the table, and they can't clothe their kids properly. But people right up to the 3% have less money to spend now than they had in 2007. It's a good question as to why the middle class after 2008 didn't begin to realise that this wasn't actually in their benefit. But there's many reasons for that. One is fear. Even if you're slightly worse off than you were before, when you live in a society where people in the bottom are literally destitute and you can see street homelessness rising, the idea that you're going to start behaving collectively with everybody else takes a huge leap of the imagination. There's also learned behaviour. People don't change their opinions that fast. Young people in both the US and the UK are the ones who are quick enough and fast enough to go, actually, this thing doesn't work. We've seen what's happened in 2008, we've seen our student loans rise, we've seen the rent you want us to pay you, we've seen the future you're presenting with us, and sorry, I'm in it with everybody else, and I'm not going to try and get into the top 1% as my game plan. The one thing we can say with great confidence is that things will change. So things always change, and there's a terrible tendency to think that they don't, and to forget that actually in the last 10 years they changed enormously. So the idea that it's going to be like this next year, the year after, that doesn't actually happen. How things will change is much harder to say, but people need time. They don't change in 1 year or even 10 years, their long haul views, but they do change over half a generation or longer. And that's saying quite a lot, but when those views change, the change is dramatic. To give you an example, in the United Kingdom, when older people mucked up negotiations from the second time in a young generation were told that they had to go and take part in a world war, that younger generation, when they came back from that world war, had lost faith in the older generation. And there you saw a sea change, but it was 2 world wars worth of incompetence that got to that. Right? The big changes in beliefs take time. The civil rights movement, you're actually looking at decades of progress to get to the 1960s, and then what happened. The position of women, that's not an overnight change. That's a century-fold mass movement, and before that century, that's a huge amount of agitation. I think there's a very good chance that we're at the kind of peak ignorance at the moment. We won't see in future the numbers of people who currently say it is the poor's fault that they're poor ever again, at least for our lifetimes, whereas I think it'll come down. I think people who will agree that the rich are wealth creators who make everybody else wealth, I think the proportion of people who say that is going to fall and fall and fall. There is only a certain length of time you can carry on saying something that quite blatantly isn't true.